Well, hello. Hello and welcome, whoever, wherever, whenever you are. Nobody's here yet, but I'm sure somebody will show up and there will be more visitors on the replay. Thank you for showing up. I hope you stick around. Um, what I'm going to talk about, if you get involved with Cathedral windows, there's two stages to learning how to do this. And it can be discouraging because it makes a small block and you have to make a lot of them. And this method is the one doing it by hand, which gets the best three-dimensional results. Anyway, I've developed a system that's got me moving right along. The first thing is, of course, making the folded square, which is folded corners pointing in, and you do it twice. This starts as a 10-inch square from a layered cake, and you end up with this. So your first step would be to just sit down and fold up. Well, actually, before doing this, there's a step. You first sew them, fold them in half rectangular, sew them into pockets, pull the pockets together so that your seam is in the middle. Then you do the corner to corner. There are other videos talking about this. That's not what this, we're beyond that, but that's how you get started. And of course, if you're actually going to make a whole quilt or a number of, and this lends itself to wall hangings, that's my next project with this. But if you're going to do a lot, the best thing to do, I think, is to simply sit down with a good big layer cake stack and do them up. This size, for a twin size quilt, I'm counting about 100, actually 120, because it's going to be 10 across and 12, no, more than 12. It might be, well, at least 120. Let's say between 120 and 130 or 50. So if you get a layer cake package, you're going to want quite a number of squares. These, as I say, this starts out as a 10-inch square and ends up, once it's folded, it's 4.5 inches once it's folded. So you can go by that as for what your size should be. Now, once it's folded, the first thing to do is, I should have got better prepared here. You sew them up in twos. Just sew them all together in pairs. Sew the pairs into 4 patches. And you can then get started. Here, you have your 2.5-inch squares are going to go into the middle, right? So you sew your 4 patches together. You can start putting the squares in now, or you can sew a couple of these. I'm doing them as 16s, basically taking 4 patches, then sewing them together, and then inserting the window panes, you see? Now, one of the things, if you go by all the previous instructions and you're looking at other people's cathedral window tutorials, they all tell you to do this, to tack these points down. I'm not doing that anymore because I have found that leaving them loose makes it actually easier. And then I sew this part. I just loosely whip stitch around the edges. That is going to be covered. And then after it's in, whoops, let me see. After it's in, then you can sew this part down later. And this makes it go a lot faster because not only are you skipping a step of sewing the points together, but it's easier to manipulate. And so that basically gives you a good system, and it won't take long to make one large block that's going to be 16 small squares together, small patches, window frames. And as I say, just loosely whip stitch this down, and then later you can go over it and you make the this curvy part, of course, simply by folding it over once you've stitched everything down. And this, I don't have a seam showing because I just put tiny little stitches tacking it down, being careful to make them invisible. I don't want them to show. Now, some people like to go completely through and actually quilt it and leave a top stitch seam there. And then that would leave some flower-shaped quilts marks on the back. But I prefer to leave the back completely smooth. And yeah, I think I'll be making another addition to the Cathedral window playlist after I've got all of these done that I have here. I'm looking, there we go. I just want to look at chat. Okay. Anyway, I'll be doing that. Now, what I'm using for this, I've noticed that in most of the videos, most of the people doing Cathedral windows are using something like a plain white muslin for the background, because it takes the background, it takes a lot of cloth, because you're basically using 4 times as much cloth as you normally would because of all the folding. So most people are using something like a lightweight white muslin. And that's fine if you want a uniform look to the window frames. But this is from, there's an inexpensive layer cake that you can get in Amazon. And it's 100% cotton. What I like about it is I've been ordering it now and then. I think I've been ordered it about 3 times for different projects that I've worked on. It's usually the same set of prints of all different types, some of them looking kind of vintage 1930s, and most of them fairly classic, like that one, as well as some polka dots and ginghams, stripes. Now, this is really neat because you can see the different patterns and how they're going to look, so that if your first project, you order one of those layer cakes, they're actually not very expensive. It's about $25 for 600 squares, which is about 3 of these quilts, twin size quilts, 1 king size, I suppose. And you don't have to spend more money on batting because this is a coverlet. It's completely self-contained. It's one of the other things I love about it. Once you're done, you're done. You don't have to now put it in a sandwich, get it quilted, or quilt it yourself. then put a binding on. You don't need any, you don't even need a binding because the edges are folded over. Um, but the nice thing about doing it this way is not only is it a good, inexpensive way to get started, but you get a chance to decide what, when you do want to do one with the uniform fabric on the window frames, you can decide if you want something like a polka dot or stripe pattern because you can see how it's going to behave with all of the folding. And then, of course, your inner parts can be just about anything. I saw somebody talking about making a quilt out of a bunch of shirts. Shirts from her grandfather, I think, and so she wanted to make a memory quilt. I think this would be an excellent way to make a memory quilt and put all the shirting in the window panes. But anyway, that's another installment in my series of the cathedral window. And I think I'm going to have like 3 of these across for the width. So that'll be 6 4 patches across, 3 across, and maybe 5 long. So it'll be, anyway, that's the cathedral windows, and I'm going to get back to work. I've been watching some interesting stuff. I've been finding the YouTube actually did something good for once. They had their algorithm, as you may have noticed, it asks questions about what would you like it to show you. Well, somehow or other, I managed to persuade it to start showing me more movies and historical stuff. And so now I'm watching a whole series that's actually not a movie, but it's like 150 hours of a Turkish soap opera based on the fall of the Ottoman Empire. It's like Game of Thrones with Queen Victoria and the Ottoman Sultan and all that stuff going on. It's all, of course, it's all in Turkish, but it has the subtitles. And it's actually quite pleasant. I mean, I'm really hooked on it. I mean, I've actually cried real tears. When the grandmother of the Sultan died, I cried. And it's funny because you're seeing things through very different eyes. One of the things I found interesting about it is because, of course, they have a polygamous culture. When we think about polygamy and we watch things like Sister Wives, that guy, I can't think of his name, and his 6 wives, I guess they were kind of a Mormon adjacent group. I mean, I think they followed their own religion, but they were Western American doing polygamy. All of the social interactions are very much affected by our dominant culture. And there's a whole lot that goes on that you don't have to explain. If you're American, you can see the little signals of tension between the sister wives and all this other stuff that would go on. But when you're watching a polygamous society in its own world, there's a lot of stuff they don't feel like they need to explain. It makes absolutely no sense to somebody who comes out of a nominally monogamous. I mean, we all know that people aren't monogamous. We have what I call serial polygamy here, where you marry, divorce, marry, divorce. So there's all kinds of arguments about which system is better. Um, I don't think the polygamous system is good because I grew up around too much of the mean girl culture, and I can't imagine that. But watching how they interact, the thing that struck me most was I'm about 30. I'm up to about episode 40. Okay, so I'm a third of the way through the series. I've been binge watching it. And I'm still very confused as to who is somebody's sister and who is his wife because they don't feel like they need to explain that. The Sultan, through most of the first bunch of episodes, there's this woman whose name is pronounced something like Burden Kurdan or something like that. She looks like she's the wife. And then the other women that live in the palace are like the sister-in-law who's married to one of the high officials and their daughters and nieces and, different women. But there's a lot of confusion because they're also very close to their brothers. And their brothers are all, of course, this is the Ottoman Empire back in the Victorian, the late 1800s, early 1900s. And they have all this intrigue going on because it's a soap opera, like Game of Thrones, but set in that setting. And it's the hardest thing for somebody like me to figure out, well, which one is the sister, which one is the wife, whose daughter is who, because they all refer to the girls as their daughters, and then after a while you figure out, oh, wait a minute, this one is her daughter, and she's the in-law who's scheming against the Sultan, and all this intrigue. And then all of a sudden, the Sultan's wife, who's having a baby, shows up on a train. And so the one that was functioning as the Sultan's wife and their son, the prince, has been part of all these first episodes. Well, all of a sudden, the real head wife is the one who's presently pregnant. So the mother of the prince suddenly steps back a little bit, but you don't see any of the hierarchical mean girl pecking order stuff that you would see if it were the Sister Wives reality TV stuff. It very different how they interact. They do have their claws out. So anyway, when I'm sewing, I've got that on. And now I'm up to episode 41. And I cried real tears because one of the heroes is the handsome young son of, his father runs a little restaurant, coffee shop. And so he plays the part of the hero for the people who, falls in love with one of the girls in the harem and all this other stuff. But it's very modern because it's telling a historical story, and they're still horse and buggy days, the 1910s, 1890s, 19 teens. I can't remember exactly when did Queen Victoria die. It was in the 1890s, I think. She's still alive during this part. Because the fall of the Ottoman Empire happened around the same time as World War One, or just before World War One. So you've got the telegraph and you've got trains, but you don't have cars or airplanes. Anyway, it's good, great escapism, and it's also something that really makes you understand a little bit more the way our arguments are affected by the fact that we really don't see each other the same way when you go from one culture into another. There's really a lot that is lost in translation. Oh well. Let me check the chat, see if anyone is saying hello. Well, come on. Okay, I'll catch you all later. Thank you for showing up. Please share, like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. And I do believe I am probably being throttled by the algorithm because I ventured out into controversial territory in some of my remarks in recent videos, but well, I said my piece, and whoever knows I'm here will find me. But it would help if you could share it out, throw if you see. Well, I don't think they're going to give me hype anymore because of the throttling. They don't want people talking about controversial politics. But we manage to do it anyway, don't we? Anyway, Denise Matteau, over and out.